Hi, Tamasha. Malinguro. Oh, sorry if I murder your names. One more minute, then we'll hit and start. Okay. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Silva Ehiwario. Let me know if you cannot hear me. I want to make sure I'm reaching out to everyone. So my name is Silva Ehiwario. I want to thank you all, especially now, our instructor, for making this happen. Amidst the COVID-19 situation going on right now, you guys still find out time to join us on our event today to learn a skill. We really do appreciate IT Experience, Code for You, Women Who Code, we appreciate, and we say thank you for being here today. Like I said, my name is Silva Ehiwario. I'm the director of Women Who Code here in Houston. And as we all know, Women Who Code is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to help women excel in their technology career, which is why we have events like this, where people can come learn skills and get running in tech. Also, IT Experience is also a nonprofit organization whose mission is to help people transition seamlessly into the tech industry through projects, mentorship, help, interview preparation, and a whole lot more that you will see in the website. And also events like this will help people learn skills that would help them position themselves well for the digital era that we're into, and also help them get a good job and give them the opportunity to freelance if they want. And with me here is now the instructor. I'll let him introduce himself in a bit. And also we're opportunity to have the VP of IT Experience here with us today, Michael. Michael, say hi to everyone. Oh, I think we can't hear you. Hello, Michael? Let's see.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Silva mentioned, we are in an unprecedented time in our history. We have the COVID-19 situation going on, and a lot of people have been impacted in one way or the other, either through job loss, have going through families that are impacted by this disease, but we're going to overcome it, right? So really appreciate you guys coming together to join us for today. So let's hope that we can learn something, learn a skill that would empower us as we move into the future here. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So now over to you. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Code for You, and let's get the workshop rolling. And before he starts, this is going to be an interactive section. Feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, and let us make it very interactive. And also, I'm going to send some links below if, after the workshop, you need help with any problem you're having with your code or bugs, or if you're doing any fun thing with the chatbot, but we want to know about it. We want you to share it with us. Let's put your project in the spotlight and see what happens. But in case you need to communicate with Niall or myself, I will send some links below, LinkedIn and Slack, so that we can all chat after now. Thank you all for coming, and Niall, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Niall. I am working on this group, basically a group called Code for the Hue. We're like a community of people that are working towards making technology that improves our city, our wonderful city, in areas of like civic interaction, whether it be health, food, housing. We want to use this platform as a way to help empower people with the technical skills in order to solve problems in their community. And one of the ways we're doing that is through this amazing session on how to build a chatbot. I've been building chatbots for the past couple of years now. Done chatbots for situations related to Hurricane Harvey. I've worked on chatbots for getting out the vote and other things. And when coming up with this, I wanted to make sure that this webinar kind of gives you a general framework of how you kind of theoretically build a chatbot, and also the practical skills on how to actually write the code and deploy it and things of that nature. So it's going to be a combination of those things, some of the kind of theoretical and abstract things, and then also more of the concrete things that correlate to code. So I'm going to start with sharing this presentation. The presentation is in the chat, so if you are interested in following along, you can follow along on the presentation. So let's share screen. And whoa. Here we go. All right. So basically, we're going to go through a couple of things. The first thing is we're going to kind of explain what chatbots are. I've met a lot of people who, when I tell them what I do, when I talk about how I build chatbots, the first thing they have is, what is a chatbot? I don't actually even know what that is, mainly because there's not a lot of popular chatbots that people know about, but it's a technology that people are actually really interested in once they kind of hear about it. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. The second thing that we're going to do is dive into more of the terminology of terminology of chatbots, things that you need to be aware of when you're building a chatbot, from a kind of more abstract approach, and then more so in like how you actually plan out your chatbot project. And then the third thing that we're going to do is basically build a chatbot. It's going to be very quick. I already have kind of preset code written out for you guys, and that's also in the chat below. So if you want to look at the code beforehand, you can do that. Or if you want to reference the code after the fact, you can also do that. And I'll be also like explaining the code, showing how it works and things of that nature. So the first thing is, what is a chatbot? And the way that I explain it to people, it's pretty simple. I think of a chatbot as like you're talking to another person. You have a friend that you talk to, you ask them a question, they give you an answer. Instead of it being a friend, it's a robot. In more technical terms, it's a software application that allows for you to have a conversation with essentially a computer. This usually looks like, whether it be through Facebook Messenger, whether it be through other interfaces, it's essentially a simple way to get information or to do a task without having to have a complicated user interface. Chatbots have been used in a variety of different industries. They've been used in healthcare. So for example, there's a chatbot that does telemedicine, for example. Individuals will ask the questions, and then the chatbot will like help self-diagnose individuals on certain medical conditions. It's been used in marketing. Chatbots are very good at like getting people to like subscribe to something and then periodically send messages to those individuals about new products that are being created. It's definitely great in the urban planning space. Some people use chatbots as a simple surveying tool, so they can give surveys to individuals without having to like have this full paper process and constantly gather the data. It's like a simple way to access a survey, or also to help people connect with seeing what issues there are in their community. Social services is also another area that chatbots are being used, helping connect individuals to social services in their community. And also it's a big thing in politics. Chatbots are being used in get out the vote initiatives. It's being used in much more political engagement initiatives. And it's surprising how much people are willing to adopt this technology into their common workflow. There are three main reasons why I'll be a firm advocate for chatbots. One of the things is that apps are kind of, I say they're a dying breed. Partially that's because of a bias that I have. But one thing to know is that many people don't like downloading apps. Outside of the essential apps that people use, like you know, your YouTube apps, your apps like your mail app. Outside of those, most people don't like downloading apps. They'll download your app for a particular use, and then they'll delete it instantaneously. And that sucks for a lot of people, because if your app is dependent upon constantly having the app on your phone, if someone deletes it, then you've lost a user. Whereas with chatbots, you can actually engage with users in a way without having to have them download an actual app. You can use platforms like Kik, Facebook Messenger, Telegram, text message, and other apps like Line. That basically is one app, but because you can use a chatbot, you're basically making an app within an app. So much more sustainable app that most people don't delete, like Facebook Messenger or the text messaging app on your phone. You can now basically extend the functionality of your current service into a format that's easier for everyone to access. The second thing that's really cool about chatbots is that they're very accessible and they're very convenient. One of the things that's difficult about apps and other websites in general is that every website, you're basically learning a new interface. There's not a standard kind of design for every website, because every website's different. And because of that, you know, it's very complicated for many people to, like, you use one website and then you go to a different website and it's completely different. And you're like, I gotta relearn this entire thing. But people can easily engage with a chatbot because it's just text messaging. It's basically what people do on an everyday basis. This is also important for individuals with certain, that are differently abled in certain capacities. Many web applications aren't actually ADA accessible due to like color blindness, or you know, don't have the ability to use like a mouse. Certain websites and certain apps are just very difficult to use for the average user. But most, if not all, messaging apps are actually ADA compliant. So individuals who have, or who are differently abled in certain capacities, will still be able to interact with your chatbot in a way that they wouldn't be able to if you were to build a website yourself. The last thing is it's easy to scale and reach new users with chatbots. One of the things that's a big challenge with websites in general is bandwidth. You're essentially transferring a bunch of information back and forth all of the time. And for some websites that's necessary, but for others that might not be. And you might be able to have better performance when you're using a chatbot, just simply because you're not transferring all of these different files when they log on to a website. They're not transferring these JavaScript files, these different HTML pages. All it is 180 characters that's being transferred over. And that makes it easier to scale because you're using less bandwidth, and it's also easy to reach new users because they're on platforms that already have a currently existing user base. There are some reasons why you shouldn't use chatbots. Chatbots aren't the end-all, be-all for all solution for all things. Not everything can just be turned into a chatbot. One of the things that can't really be turned into a chatbot are things that have multi-user engagement. Stuff like Facebook, for example, that allows for you to interact with multiple people at a particular time is not a great solution with chatbots, because chatbots are really more of like a one-on-one conversation. And when you're trying to create something that is multiple users engaging, it can be very complicated. And while it does work with some things like group chats, when you start expanding to more and more complicated things that have multiple users engaging with one another, it can be very complicated. The second thing is that the chatbots are very simplistic in nature. So if you're trying to convert something that already has complex interactions into a chatbot, it becomes a very difficult process, and I would not recommend doing that. Things like YouTube, for example, I would never build a YouTube on a chatbot, just because there's so many complicated things that are going on with a YouTube website. Some people are uploading videos, some people want to look at how many viewers on a particular app. There's so many, or on a video, there's so many different things that can be done in YouTube that makes doing a chatbot that's like a YouTube chatbot would be very complicated. Thirdly, if it can't be modeled in a simple conversation, you really shouldn't do it in a chatbot. So a chatbot, for example, it's going to be very linear conversation that you want people to go through. And if it's not very linear, or if it's not something that can be easily modeled in a conversation, you really don't want to do it. So in general, if you see chatbots as a new technology that you want to incorporate into your service, what you need to know is that chatbots should complement what you're doing, and it should not really replace what you're doing. So if you already have a current business and you want to incorporate chatbots into it, keep your website, because you're still going to need that. Just add chatbots as an additional thing into your platform in order to grow and expand your market. So there's some good ideas for chatbots, and then there's some bad ideas for chatbots. The good ideas, like if you're trying to create an e-commerce platform, that's a very simple thing to do. In chatbots, that's really actually very interesting. A lot of companies like Domino's, they're using chatbots to actually help people order pizzas, and it's very effective, surprisingly. Location finder services are also very helpful in chatbots, or can be easily done with chatbots. Individuals, if you can text a location or get someone's coordinates and you can send them a nearest location, that's another service that chatbots have been very effective in doing. Also, doing surveys. If you want to have some sort of chatbot that asks people a bunch of questions, like you're at a conference, you want to say, let's make a simple chatbot that asks people, hey, what was your idea on the conference? How can we improve? Things of that nature. That's great to build into a chatbot. There are some bad ideas, like social media platforms, for example, are not particularly great ideas for chatbots, just because there's so many things that you can do that are very complicated in a chatbot. Let's see a question. Okay. There are many complicated things in a chatbot or for a social media platform. The second thing is complex location finders. So you have like simple location finders that are like, I just need your address, I need this minor piece of information. More complex location finders would be like, you have all these different filters, like filter by this category and this subcategory. The more complicated the conversation gets, the more likely you should not be using a chatbot for it. And anything with like complicated visual interface. So if you currently have a website that has multiple features, multiple different things that a user can do, you don't want to just try to move that to a chatbot. What you want to do if you're going to do that is make sure that you simplify. You want to make the chatbot a simplified version of what you want to make. So simplify what you currently have and then move it over to a chatbot if you're really, and if that's what you really want to do. Now, not all chatbot platforms are created equal. There are many different apps that you can build a chatbot on. Some of them are very simple. Some of them allow you to do more things. So SMS, which is like your text messaging, Facebook Messenger, you can also build on Facebook Messenger. You can also build on Telegram, and you can build on Kik, which is an app that I've heard of people using like a long time ago or a while ago when I was like in high school or something. Some of these platforms allow for you to do certain things and not do certain things. SMS is very simple. You can send text and you can send images to another user, which is very cool. But you can't do some of the complicated things, like sometimes on other chatbot platforms, you can use buttons. So like instead of it being someone types in what they think, they can like have a preset selected number of options that they can choose from using buttons. You can do that in Telegram, Kik, and Facebook Messenger, but you can't obviously do that in your regular text message. Facebook Messenger and Telegram are great, especially for e-commerce platforms, because you can also actually accept payments through the Facebook Messenger chatbot and through the Telegram Messenger chatbot. So if you have an e-commerce store and you want to build a chatbot on it, you could actually even go through the process of having people buy things through the chatbot if you're using Facebook Messenger and if you're using Telegram. So now that we've kind of given like a general overview of the chatbot landscape, I want to go over some like very specific chatbot terminology that you might hear me saying throughout this presentation. The first thing is that I would say there are two bigger categories of chatbots. There are rule-based chatbots and there are like AI chatbots. And this is not necessarily a either or, this is definitely a spectrum. A chatbot can have some elements of rule-based and some elements of AI. But rule-based chatbots are essentially, chat is a chatbot where the responses are predetermined and the expected messages from the users are also predetermined. And you have like a very specific rule that you have in order to match the question or the response from the user and then the response that you'll send to the user of the chatbot. So that's different than AI chatbots. There are some chatbots that are built where that the language that is being responded to the user from the chatbot is not set in stone. You're not coding it out. Usually what happens is they get a bunch of conversations from Reddit, from different platforms, and they train the chatbot to basically learn how to respond to different questions. So you'll have a chatbot and you'll ask it, hey, how are you doing? And then the chatbot should actually be able to respond, I'm doing fine, how are you doing? Or something of that nature. There are definitely hybrids. You can have some chatbot, you have a chatbot that has some AI components where it can respond to free-form questions, but also is kind of rule-based in the sense that it expects users to go through a particular workflow and generally has preset rules on how it responds to certain questions and certain responses from the end user. What you want to determine in order to build one or the other is speed, the user expectations, and the technical capacity of the team. So speed, it's a lot easier to build a chatbot that's rule-based, where you've predefined the user responses to the chatbot and then the responses from the chatbot to the end user. But if you have more time, going with the AI route is a lot better. User expectations is also important. There might be chatbots where you might not have the technical capacity to build the chatbot in an AI way, but you might actually need to because users might engage with the chatbot in a way that's not rule-based necessarily. For example, if you were to build like a counselor chatbot, like a chatbot that is like a therapy counselor, you want it to be more AI-based rather than rule-based because the user is expecting to be able to respond in a way that's much more free-form than what you would expect for a rule-based chatbot. also technical capacity. If your team is technically capable of building an AI chatbot, that might be the route that you want to go. But if you don't need to do that, or if you don't have the technical skills to get it fully trained out, you might want to go more towards the rule-based chatbot. Now, there are two types of like the types of chatbots. They're vertical and horizontal chatbots. Now, horizontal and vertical is not necessarily unique to chatbots, but any type of application. A horizontal chatbot essentially would be a chatbot that wants to be the jack of all trades for everything. So like Google, for example, you can ask Google, you can go on Google and ask almost any question, and it can give you a pretty close answer to whatever question you ask it. It takes a long time to get to that particular point, but it's like also very broad. A vertical chatbot is essentially a chatbot that's built to specifically address a question that a user may have. So that might be if you're building like WebMD, for example, is more specific in regards to medical things than Google, but WebMD is not the place that you're going to go if you're looking to buy a house, for example. And your chatbots are going to be very similar. You might want to sacrifice some of the breadth of being a chatbot in order to be more depth in a particular area. And usually you want to make that decision based on like a particular niche that you want to solve with your chatbot. Another thing that you should know, this is more terminology and how you plan out your chatbot. There are two things that you kind of want to be aware of. One is the flow of a chatbot, and then two is the state of a chatbot. Whenever you're having a conversation with a particular end goal in mind, the entire conversation that you've pre-planned is essentially the flow, and the state is the point at which they are in that conversation. So if we were to look at the example, if you engage with a person at a pie restaurant, right? You walk up to the cashier person says, "Hey, would you like a pie?" Right? At that particular moment, that person too is essentially what point you are in the conversation. If you respond yes, you advance in the conversation. So you're essentially moving down the state. However, if someone asks you, "Hi, would you like a pie?" And then you say, for example, "The sky is blue today, and I really like the color of the sky," that doesn't advance you through the conversation. So you're still essentially stuck at this question of, "Hi, would you like a pie?" So when you're building out chatbots, you want to manage, you want to create flows, but then you also need to manage the state at which a user is in a particular conversation. That's just something that you generally need to know when you're building a chatbot. Now, there are four kind of like things that you take into consideration or four kind of components to a chatbot, essentially. The first, question. What is an example of a Facebook Messenger chatbot? So one example of a Facebook Messenger chatbot that I know of is, I'm trying to remember, there's ResistBot, for example. ResistBot is a chatbot that allows for you to message your city or your state council members, and they will send you messages they'll send you messages periodically that actually tell you like, "Hey, this COVID situation is taking place. You want to message your counselor or your representative, message them through this particular thing." You can access them usually by like Facebook pages. So every Facebook page, there's that send message button. And what you're allowed to do is essentially connect that Facebook Messenger send message component to a web application on a different backend that's built for the Facebook Messenger bot, so that you can have that interaction. So that's a good question, Ed. So there are four kind of major components to a chatbot. The first component is like a user model. The user model is essentially, you're going to have a database that has information about all of the users and more specific information about a particular user in your database. The user model, you're going to like usually store the critical information that the chatbot needs to know in order to actually conduct the things that it needs to conduct. The second part of a chatbot is the intent. The intent is usually something that is sent from a third party. The intent usually conveys information about the message that is being sent from the user. So if you're using services like Dialogflow, or if you're building stuff with Amazon, with their platform, they have what's called intent schemas. And in those intent schemas, it categorizes what the intent of the message is being sent from the user. So for example, you might have a user that says, "Hi, chatbot, what is today's date?" And you will program out some sort of logic that determines that that is a particular question intent. So like, what's 2 + 2? It'll say like math question intent, for example, and then it'll also transfer that information about the statement that's being used. The third part, you're going to have what's called a controller. And your controller is basically going to manage how your chatbot interacts with the data in the database about a particular user, and then also information about the intent, as well as what platform they're using. This is kind of like the glue for the entire application. So it gets all of the different things together and then sends that response to the end user on their particular platform. And then you finally have what's called a responder. Your responder is basically a function that maps the response from the chatbot and sends it to a particular platform. You might be building these chatbots for more than just one platform. You might build it for SMS. You might also have one for Facebook Messenger. You might also have one for Telegram. And you want to make sure that you have different responders that send the messages to the right platform. And that's kind of managed in that particular section. For individuals who are familiar with like web development, there's this thing called MVC, Model View Controller. And essentially, these categories kind of map over to Model View Controller in this particular way. Your user model is going to be very similar to like the models that you have in an MVC framework. Your controller and your intent, that's information that's usually comprised in the controller component of your if you're building in an MVC framework. And your view is similar to your responder in a chatbot. The only difference being that with MVC, you're generally viewing things, and with the responder, you're not really viewing like visualizations or HTML. It's just kind of like text. So that's kind of the difference, but those are kind of the similarities in regards to MVC and kind of those 4 main components of a chatbot. So we're gonna start building a chatbot, but I'm gonna leave this time right now. If you have any particular questions, to put those in the chat right now. Okay. If you have any questions, I'm going to continue then. But if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat so that I can respond to them. So what we're going to build is essentially a rollout chat. Can you explain the importance? Okay, MVC is actually a design pattern that many people use when building web applications. So if you're building a website in general, you generally build based on the MVC framework. It's a way in which you structure your code in order for your code to be basically neat and organized for other developers to build on. So you put your models essentially in one file, you put your views in a different file or in a different folder and file, and your controllers are in a different file. And it makes it easy for things to interact and also for your code to be organized so that other people can work off of it. So for this, the chatbot that we're going to be building today is essentially Rollout Chatbot. Now, there's an app called Rollout, and it's a very great app, in my opinion. It's an app that basically tells you when is your trash schedule, if you live in Houston, you know that every day is so complicated. You have heavy trash one day, you have recycling another day, and sometimes it's hard to keep up. So this person built an app that basically does that, and that's really cool. And I was thinking maybe we could like work on a form that work on a chatbot that is essentially rollout, but for on SMS. So we're going to build that, and one of the things that you need to have in order to build this chatbot is you need to have Python installed, preferably Python 3. However, I do think that the code is agnostic enough that you can use this in Python 2 as well. The links to download Python are on the slide. The slide shows in the chat if you want to download that. You also are going to need Postgres. Postgres is a database type that we are building this chatbot on. You don't have to specifically use Postgres, but that's just what we're going to use today. Version 11, at least version 11 should work. There are also two other things that you need to install. Git is a code versioning tool that is very helpful. It allows for you to deploy your things to Heroku, and it also allows for you to save your code on GitHub. So you're going to need to install that. You're also going to need to install the Heroku CLI, which is a tool that allows for you to specifically deploy your code on Heroku. We're going to be using Heroku for deploying the chatbot, but if you want to build the chatbot and deploy it on other platforms like Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud Platform, you can do that as well. But that won't be covered in this particular example. The reason why we're using Python is I think Python is an amazing programming language that allows for you to build things and incorporate all of these amazing libraries that are very good for natural language processing. So for example, they have a library called NLTK that allows for you to parse and analyze text in a way that's just amazing. TensorFlow is a deep learning library that you can also incorporate into your chatbots and other things of that nature. We're not going to be using those libraries for this example, but those are things that are options available for you if you want to make more complicated chatbots. All right. There are two other requirements that you're going to need. The first thing is you're going to need a Twilio account. The chatbot that we're going to be building today is going to be purely SMS. So if you want to follow along and test it out and try it out once you finally build it, you're going to need a Twilio account. They give you, when you sign up, you get $15 of credits in order to test your account. And it's pretty inexpensive relatively when deploying them and trying to scale them. Another thing that you're going to need is Google Cloud Platform account. That's particularly for geocoding a user. In this chatbot, we're going to need to get the user's location, and you're going to need to geocode that location in order to tell them what area they're in and then help them find out what trash schedule they have. The Google Cloud Platform, when you sign up, you get about $200 of free credits for that month. So if you want to test it and expand or experiment with it, you'll definitely have enough credits in order to build this platform. Now, the flow of the chatbot is going to be very simple. You're going to ask basically three simple questions. The first question you're going to ask is, what's your address? The second question is, what's your zip code? And then the third thing that you're going to do is like tell them their trash schedule and give them the option to search again. So there are basically three states: your state one, your state two, and then your third state that you can engage in the chatbot. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and get to this code. So all right, try to figure Oh wait, did I? All right, cool. So let me do this. All right. All right. So so I'm building this in Python. Excuse me, that was not the right. I'm using Windows as my operating system. So the commands that I'm going to be typing are going to be different than if you're on a Mac or if you are on a Linux operating system. So I'm going to go back to so I'm going to be, if you were to go to command prompt, if you were to search for your command prompt in like your types of search, you'll type in command prompt and that will be what pops up. This is what will pop up. It'll actually be on the usually at this directory. If you are using a Linux or a Mac, it's going to probably say terminal instead of command prompt. So just know that that's probably one of the differences. What you're going to do is you're going to CD. CD is to change directory. You'll change directory. You'll change your directory to your desktop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a directory. So I'm going to say mkdir in order to make directory. And I'm going to name, you can name this, it's going to be a folder essentially. You're making a folder. You're going to make whatever folder you want. In this particular case, I'm going to make it test. And then I'm going to CD, I'm going to change into that directory. All right. So if you have Python installed, you're going to install a couple of different packages in order to build this chatbot. First package that you're going to install is Flask. So you're going to say pip install Flask. I have most of these packages already installed, so it's going to look different for me than it would for other individuals. The second package you're going to install is pip. You're going to pip install Flask SQL Alchemy. This is basically a library. These are libraries to help you build a website in Flask, but essentially what we're doing is we're building a website that is our chatbot that connects to the phone number that we're going to be using. So we're going to next pip install requests. Requests is a library that allows for you to send requests from one service to another, or basically get a URL and get the information from that URL. Next thing we're going to install is pip. We're going to install python.env. This allows for us to read a file called a .env file. Next thing we're going to install is we're going to pip install Flask script. This basically allows for you to run these things called command or scripts within Flask. It's helpful for migrating your database, and I'll work on that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. We're going to next pip install Flask migrate. This is more specifically for migrating your database. We're next going to pip install a library called psycopg2. This is a library for interacting with your Postgres database in Python. If you are in Mac, if you're on a Mac, you're going to actually not use psycopg2. You're going to do what's called psycopg2 binary. I'm going to type that in the chat, what you're going to type. That's the library that you would install if you own a Mac. If you're on Linux, you could use either psycopg2 or psycopg2 binary. The last library we're going to install is, we're going to install Flask, or we're going to install Gunicorn. So pip install, or I'll say gunicorn. So gunicorn is a library that allows for you to basically, helps you better connect your website that's built in Python to other services. I'll explain more of that when we get later into the example. So next, we're going to go to make a. So I'm gonna open. Wait. So I'm using Sublime Text as my text editor. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna type it out. So PsychoPG is actually to help you connect your Python to your Postgres database. So the Psycho is PsychoPG to binary. So it's that, yeah. Is there a list of it? Oh, sorry. I will, so I'm gonna access there's a GitHub repo that has all of the code. I will copy and paste that, I'll copy and paste the repo so that you could see basically all the code that we're writing. And then I'm gonna also copy and paste the libraries to install as well. Do not mind the exclamation marks or the asterisks. I'm going to explain. This is a different file, but I'll explain how we're going to write that out later. So I'm going to open that folder that we just created called rollout.test. So let's see, share screen. Is it the right one? All right, so this should be it. All right, so the first file that we're going to make is we're going to first make our user model. So I'm going to call that file, I'm going to call it models.py. The first thing that we're going to do, we're going to import, from Flask SQL Alchemy, we're going to import a library called SQL Alchemy. SQL Alchemy is Flask SQL Alchemy is a wrapper for a library called SQL Alchemy, and we're basically importing that. We're importing that the model or this library from the Flask SQL Alchemy library. Next, we're going to create a thing called DB, and we're going to call that SQL Alchemy like this. This connects us to our database, and we're going to now start building out our model. So the first we only need one model. In this particular case, it's the users. So we're going to create a class called users. Go with the DB model, and then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an ID. The ID is going to be db.column. And the reason why we're saying db.column is we're creating, with this model file, we're essentially creating our database. And in your database, you have columns and you have basically columns and rows. Each class is going to be our new row in the database, and the columns, we're basically declaring them in this model. So we're going to call a column, and then we're going to give it different types. So in this case, our ID is going to be an integer type. We're going to auto-increment, we're going to make it the primary key. This means it's unique. It's a unique ID that is the primary reference point. And we're going to auto-increment, we're going to make that true. So essentially what happens was whenever you create a new user, it'll give it an ID that starts off with a particular number, and every new user is going to be an incremented ID that's unique to that particular user. The next thing that we're going to do is create an address. So that's going to be a DB column. No. The next thing we're going to do, sorry about that. Next thing we're going to do is platform. So the platform is essentially what platform we're using to connect the user to the chatbot. So if we were to expand this to different chatbots, you might change the platform from like Twilio to Facebook or whatever, and in this particular case, we're only going to use one platform, but we just want to have that code just in case if we were to expand this to other things. So we're going to have a DB column, and then this is going to be DB string for the text, and we got to give it a length. In this particular case, we're going to give it a length of like 30. We're also going to have contact. This is the ID from the particular platform. In this particular case, contact is going to store the phone number from the user. So it's going to be DB column, DB string, and for safe measures, we're going to just make it a length of 30 as well. Next thing we're going to need is the address. So we're going to db.column, DB string, make that a length of maybe 100. We're going to have zip code. We're going to make that a string as well, just in case. And that's going to be a length of, we'll say 10. Then the next thing we're going to have is we're going to have state. This is going to be DB column, DB, this is going to be an integer. The next, what we're going to do is set a default equal to 0. What we want to make sure is that whenever a user joins the chatbot is essentially their initial state is a state of 0. Now we're going to create our init function for it. So self. This is basically when you create a new object, we're going to pass in the parameters to that object. In this case, the only parameters that we really need is these two, the platform and the contact. So we're going to first create platform. We're going to pass in a thing called platform and a thing called contact. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to say, self is something in Python that allows for you to reference that particular class. So when you see me type out self.platform, what that just basically is telling you is this self.platform is referencing this particular variable right here. And when you're initializing a new object, you're essentially passing in a self as one of the parameters usually. So self.platform, we're going to make that equal to platform, and then we're going to have self.contact, and we're going to make that equal to contact. That's basically all we need in this particular file. The next file we're going to make is our migrate.py file. It's going to be called migrate.py. And this file, I'm going to copy and paste this file from another one, but essentially, I'm going to go and explain everything to the best of my ability. So this is, all right. So this is our migrate file. Our migrate file is a little bit complicated, but I'm going to explain what it all is saying. Right. The first thing that it's doing is going to import a file called app. In this particular case, we haven't created that app file yet, but from the app file, we're going to import the variable app into this particular file. I'll explain that a little bit later, but in the second line, we're from models, we're importing DB. So in this file, we created DB. What we're doing is in this command, we're importing the models.py file, and then more specifically, getting this object and importing it here. The next thing that we're doing right here is we're importing some commands essentially from these two libraries that we installed called Flask script and Flask migrate. We're importing manager, migrate, and migrate command. The next thing we're doing is creating our migrate. Migrate basically creates this object that allows for us to easily migrate our databases, and it's connecting the app and the database in this function essentially. Compare type, it says compare type equals true, mainly because you might have a migration where you change one of these types. So like I might change context from string to like, let's say text. If I were to change that to text, normally it wouldn't recognize that, but if you pass in compare type equals true, it'll recognize when you make new changes to your types, as well as adding different as you add different rows and columns to your models. Manager.add command DB. Basically, we're going to be typing command line arguments, and whenever we add we're going to type out DB. This connects it to the migrate command, basically allowing us to initialize our migrations. Migrations being creating our database and then transferring that database to other services that we may need. This last part is very simple. Whenever you initialize a Python file, if you were to say print and then this object, if it's the actual file itself, it'll print main. However, if you're importing a file and you say, like for example, if I were to go into models, if I did models dot name, and I said print that. If I were to say print models dot name, it will not print main, it will print models dot py. Whereas if I were to do say print migrate dot name, it will not print the name of the file, but it will print main. So in this particular case, what we're basically saying is, if the name, which is in reference to migrate.py, is main, which means we're actually running this particular file, then run the manager that we've created. So that is essentially our migrator that's going to help us create our databases. The next thing that we need to make now is our functions. This is basically our controllers for, the controllers for our chatbot. This is going to be, it's going to be a combination of different, there's going to be different functions that are created. And I'm going to copy and paste some functions, but then also type out some functions, just because there's some that are kind of more complicated to explain than just simply like writing it out myself. So make a new file, functions.py. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do in functions.py is we're going to import requests. This is going to help us connect to different services that we have. The next thing that we're going to also do is we're going to import OS. OS is a standard library, so this isn't something that you need to install. It comes with Python by default, but it allows for us to access certain variables that we wouldn't have access to, or variables that are stored on the operating system. So if you want to access a variable on the operating system, it will be accessible through this OS library, essentially. All right. So the next thing that we're going to import, we're from models. We're going to import DB. The reason why we're importing DB from here is that we're going to need to save the database a couple of times in different functions. So we're going to import that DB in order to save information. The last thing we're going to import, so we're going to say from .env import load.env. This is the python.env library, but when you're importing it, it'll just be called .env. The first thing we're going to do is load.env, and we're going to say verbose equals true. That's just kind of one of the parameters you're going to need. Now, the first function I'm going to copy and paste, but I'm going to explain to you guys, is the function to geolocate a user. So here's the function that you use to geolocate a user. what you're going to have is you're going to pass in as text the address that the user supplies. So they're going to supply their address and their zip code. You're going to pass that into this URL. We're going to need to get that geolocation API that we have. You're going to get it from the environment with the OS library. We're going to send a request to that URL to get that information. We're going to save that in a thing called R, and then we're going to get the data from it. Usually it's returned in a JSON format. So we're returning the data in a JSON format here, saving to a variable named data. The way that Google kind of structures its response, or the response, is if it's a valid response, one that doesn't have any errors, it's going to have a parameter called return results in it. So if results is actually not in the data, we're just going to return something. We're just going to turn an empty object because we don't have a result for it. If there is results in it, we basically need to get the data that we need from it, which is going to be the latitude and the longitude in order to the geocoded results. So the first thing is, so we're going to get the data results. We're going to get the first thing in the results. We're going to get the geometry, location, and latitude in order to get the latitude. And we're going to do the same thing, but change that for longitude in order to get the longitude. Then we're going to return that in a dictionary where lat and long is the parameters right there. The second function that I'm going to copy and paste but explain to you guys is search for a zip code. So this is a function that simply allows for us to get a zip code. A user is going to text some sort of text, and we're going to need to see if their zip code is in there or not. This is a very simple function. It's not the best, but it does the job that we need it to do. What it does is, it sends a user's text message, it splits that text based on the number of spaces. So if you type someone were to text something like, hi, my zip code is 77002, it's going to split it based on these spaces. So it splits it, it turns into a list. We're going to go through each token in the list of tokens that we've created. And we're going to use this function called isDigit. We're going to see if the function is a digit. If it's true, then we're going to return that token. However, if it's not, we're going to just continue passing over. If we went through this entire list and haven't returned an integer, or a digit in this case, it's going to return false, which means that a user did not actually supply a zip code. So in this particular example, it'll return 77002. If I were to type this example, this is not correct. This will return false because there is no digit in that example. The next function that we're going to copy and paste in here is this function. This is a very long function called search for address. Now, search for address is similar to search for zip code in the sense that search for zip code basically looks at the text and returns the appropriate address, return the appropriate zip code. However, address is a little bit different in the sense that addresses start with numbers and then end with some sort of word that is unique to addresses. You know, like 123 Main Street. It ends with street. So what we're essentially doing in this function is we're getting the user's input. Let's say we'll use 123 Main Street. What we're doing in this example is we're actually reversing. We're going to split based on these spaces and then reverse the list. So what ends up happening is you start off, when we do that, we have something that looks like this: street, main, 123. And what you're able to do at this point is say, okay, now in order to figure, because if someone texts like, let's say 123, not an address. We don't know if that's actually an address or not based on the way, if we were to look at these two and we're agnostic of what addresses are, we really can't tell the difference other than knowing it ends here and it begins here. But they both start off the same way, which makes it a little complicated. So what I ended up doing was writing a function that reverses it. So the end of the address is the beginning of the text. So that means we know for sure when we see one of these endings of an address, it's going to be in this list. And then we're going to look for a number, which is the beginning of it. Once we do that, we're doing that here where we're checking to see if they're in here. If they are, then we move what's called the address started from 0 to 1. And then we start adding it to this address array. So what will happen is, let's say you have something like this, 123 Main Street is my address. It'll return an array that says address my is street Main 123. And then what we're going to do is basically say, okay, is this word, if we're at address started is 0, right? Let's see if address started is 0, see if this word is in this list. If no, just continue on. So then we go, this word isn't in this list because it's not an ending to an address. This word is not in there, so we're going to skip that one. This word is also not in there, so we're going to skip that one. Then we see street, and we're saying, okay, we see street, so let's add street into that list. And then we increment address started to 1. Once address started is incremented to 1, it's going to basically add everything into this array until we find a number. So it's like, okay, main, is that a number? No, so we're going to, excuse me. So main is not a number, so we're going to add it to here and keep going. 1, 2, 3, that is a number. So we're going to add it and then we're going to change it to 2. Once it's 2, we're going to just pass, all right? And then we have this array, street main 1, 2, 3. We then reverse the list back. So we say 1, 2, 3. We reverse the list back. It'll return as 1, 2, 3 main street. And then we're going to combine it together. So using this join function based on using a plus sign, because in order to pass it to the geocoding, it needs to have plus signs instead of spaces. So what ends up being returned from this function is something that looks like this. So that's how that function works. Finally, we're going to copy and paste a function called get trash schedule. Now this is it's a very simple function, or simple in what it does, but very long as well. The first thing that it's doing is it's going to send a request to the service called rollouthouston.com or api.rollouthouston.com. This basically, based on a Latin long coordinates that we're passing in, it's going to get the schedule if you're in the Houston boundaries. So we send that request and we check, we turn that data into JSON. If there's schedules, if schedule is not in the data, we're going to return a statement that says, I'm sorry, I can't find your trash schedule. That means that the trash schedule is not there. One of the things that I've noticed apparently is that when you text addresses that are in the Houston area, but apparently don't have a trash schedule, it's going to return a number called negative, it's going to return -1. So we're keeping that in here just because we're never sure that if that user might or might not have a trash schedule based on their geocoding. So these days are based, or these is coming from API, or the Rollout Houston API. If you see a number 1, that usually means Monday, Tuesday, and so on and so forth, with no trash being picked up on Saturdays and Sundays. There's also something that stores week information. That's also based on the days in the week. This is just so that we can have more pretty language when we send a message to the end user. So once we get that data and turn it into JSON, or into a dictionary, we're going to get the schedule, and then we're going to get the waste day. So from schedule, you're going to get a variable called waste day. We're going to turn that, it's usually a number, we're going to turn it into a string using the str function. And then we're going to pass that argument into this days dictionary that we've just created. So if it returns a 1, the waste day, which is the day that you have trash, you're going to pass in, it's going to pass in 1, and it's going to return Monday. So that's when your trash is normally picked up. Junk week is your heavy trash day. So, sorry. Heavy trash day this is called junk week. So you're going to pass in your junk week. You're going to get junk week of the month, which is which week your heavy trash is. We'll turn that into a string and then go into weeks and get that information. Junk day is the day of the week. So we're doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing. And then recycling days is similar to the way that we've done, recycling days is whether it's on a day, it's the day in the week that you have recycling. The last thing is recycling on even weeks. So they have, the way that recycling works in Houston, it alternates even or odd. So if it's even, we'll make sure that we say the recycling weeks are even, and if that's true. If it's not on even weeks, we want to make sure that we say that the weeks are odd. We'll finally send that message to the user when they get to that point in the chatbot where, say, trash day is on this particular waste day. Recycling trash day is on the blank week of this particular day. And then we say heavy yard and trash waste is on the blank day of the month. So in this case, it might be the 4th week of the 4th Tuesday or the 3rd Monday. So that's how that function kind of works. Now we're finally going to get to the part or the next part, which is managing the user and how they interact with these functions that we've just created. So, excuse me. So the first thing is we're going to say def render. Render, we're basically returning whatever text that the user has. The first thing that we're going to have is the user, so the user model that we've talked about earlier. And then the second argument we're going to need is the text being the information, the text message that the user actually sent to the chatbot. So what we do now is we're going to check the state and then apply the appropriate function based on what state they are in. The state being in the models, as we saw right here, this number, right, or this column value right here. So if user.state is equal to 0, which is the default state, we want to return, and we'll call this function address function, or no, not address function, say return address question. And then we're going to pass in the user, and then we're going to also pass in the text. If the user state is equal to 1, we're going to return a question asking them for their zip code. So we'll call that return zip code question. And then we're going to have user and then text as the response. And then else, we're going to say if user.state equals 2, we're going to return trash schedule user and then text. All right, so now we got to create those functions. So the first one that we're going to create is return address question. So we're going to hit user in the text. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just basically going, in this state, we're basically just going to ask them what's their address. So we're going to say db, or we're going to say user.state, we're going to say plus equals 1, because right now we're just incrementing their state from 0 to 1. So it puts them there. We're going to do db.session.commit. This actually saves the change that we made to this particular user, in this case, incrementing their state to 1. And then the last thing we're going to do is return a question that says, this what is your address? All right. So the next thing that we're going to do is create the next function, which is return zip code address. So we're going to say return zip code question, or zip code question. So user text. So the first thing we need to do is before we actually before we ask them for their zip code, we need to make sure that the address they submitted was actually a valid address. We can do that by simply like checking to see if we got a value of false. Because in this function, if you don't have a valid address, you're going to return a value of false essentially. So what we're going to do is say if search for address of text equals false, we're just going to, from the get-go, return this is an invalid address. Please send valid address. Say once, i.e. 123 Main Street. Otherwise, we're going to save the user address, because if it doesn't return false, if it's not false, then that means we're going to go to this next line. So we're going to say user.address, which is from this model file right here, this address model. We're going to save it. We're going to save the text essentially. We're going to then increment the user state one more time. So now they're at state 2. And then we're going to say, we're going to db.session.commit. And then we're going to return what is your zip code. Finally, we're going to do the last question, which is return trash schedule user text. So we're going to now we need to check if the user actually submitted a valid zip code. So we're going to say if search for zip text equals false. We're going to return this is an invalid zip code. Please send a valid zip. So then, if that's the case, we're going to now create the address that we submit to the user, or to the service in order to get geocoded. So we're going to say geocodable address equals these are placeholders, so we're going to format that. So we're going to pass in user.address, and then we're also going to pass in the text because it's a valid zip code. We're then going to replace whatever empty spaces we have, because there might be some spaces that we didn't count for. We're going to replace those empty spaces to plus signs, so that's codable for the back end. Now we're going to get the coordinates. So we're going to get the coordinates by using the geolocate function that we just wrote earlier, and we're going to pass in the geocodable address that has the coordinates. Then we're going to have response, the schedule. message, which is going to be, excuse me, it's going to be the get trash schedule function that we just wrote earlier. And we're going to pass in those coordinates. Finally, we're going to return to the user the message and then say if, we're going to change the state of the user back to 1. The reason why we're doing that is we want, once we send them the zip code, or once we send them their schedule, if they want to search again, we want to move them to the state that asks them for their address question, which would be, or which validates whether their response is a valid address, which would be state 1. So we're going to move them back to state 1. We're going to save those changes. And then we're going to return that to the user, say, would you to search again, please text a valid address. And then we're going to do the format function, which passes in the scheduled message that we just created. All right, so got through that part. Now we're going to finally get to one of the last parts, which is creating our app.py file that I mentioned that we needed to make earlier. All right. Excuse me. So the first, the first thing we're going to do is from Flask, we're going to import a bunch of different things. So we're going to import this thing called, we're going to import Flask. This is just a semantic thing that they do. We're going to import Flask. We're going to import a thing called response. We're going to import, we're going to import this thing called request. Flask is a Flask object. This is kind of what container, or like basically the object for our website, essentially for the chatbot. Response is a response object that we're going to send to the, there's a response object that we're going to send to the user. In this particular case, we're going to send it through Twilio. A request is the thing that allows for us to get information that's being sent to the web server. In this particular case, this helps us get the user's phone number and the text message they actually sent. So next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say from functions, we're going to import DB, we're going to import render. So we're going to import these two things from this folder right here, because this allows for us to get all of these functions without having to import all of them. We just need to import this one function. And then we're also importing DB from functions. Next thing we're going to do is from models, we're going to import users, excuse me. This goes into this models file and it imports this object right here. The next thing that we're going to import is OS. So we're going to import OS. And then we're also going to import .env. So from .env, we're going to import load.env. All right. Next thing we're going to do, I'm going to start copying and pasting some of the code just to make it go by a little bit quicker. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually load our .env file. We're going to create that in a little bit. We're going to create our app object. So remember earlier, I basically imported this app object. This is the app object that we're importing. We're going to make some configurations. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to attach the database URL to this app, the database URL to the app using this particular command, os.environ.get database URL. This is going to be in our .env file. We're going to set the track modifications to false, mainly because whenever whenever we're working with this database, it'll send errors on occasion, or not errors, but warnings. So that toggles off the warnings. Next, we're going to actually attach the app to the database object that we've created earlier. Now we're going to create two routes. So the first thing that we're going to do is create like a basic route. This isn't really going to do anything, but it kind of just shows how you would connect this to other services. So you're going to create your app route. We're going to give it a method. The method is going to be a get method. And then we're going to attach a function to this, what's called a decorator. These are decorators in Python, and it allows for you to attach functions to objects in a way, or attach functions to objects that through another function, essentially. So how we're doing that is we're next going to write this function called def index route. And then all we're going to do is just return hi, just for the heck of it. This is not where the work is going to be done. But that's kind of the basic model. When we're going to make our Twilio route. So we're going to create a Twilio route. We're going to give it a method of post. Now the difference between get and post is how the data is transferred. When you use a get route, you're usually passing in your arguments through the URL itself, whereas with post, it's being sent in a different way to the server. Twilio by default sends them through a post method, and I would recommend using a post method in order to get that information, in order to get what's information from Twilio. That's what we're doing here. We're using a post method. We're saying only post route or post methods can be applied to this route. In this case, we're going to attach a function to it called Twilio. We're going to call it Twilio route. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to say phone number equal request dot form, because it's being passed in as a form from Twilio. And we're going to say from, which is the phone number itself. We're going to say message, let's say user message equals request dot form, and it says body. This is stuff that's from Twilio. So the text message phone number is going to be from, the actual text message itself is going to be called body from Twilio. And we're saving that to those objects right here. So then we're going to say user equals users dot query dot filter by contact equals phone number and filter by platform equals Twilio. And we're going to get the first one. So this is basically interacting with our database. We're searching our database for users, and we're filtering it by two parameters. The first parameter is contact, with the contact matching the phone number. The second one being the platform, which we're calling Twilio. And we're going to get the first one. Now, if that user doesn't exist, it's going to return a none object, which is basically an empty, it's empty, it's nothing, essentially. So we could say if the user equals none, we're going to actually create a new user. So we're going to say new user equals users. And then we're going to pass in those arguments that we made earlier. So like right here, we created those, so we're going to pass in the platform and the contact. We're going to pass that information into this new declaration of the user's object. In this case, we're going to default that to Twilio. And then we're going to pass in phone number here. We're going to add that new user. So we're going to say db.session.add, and then we're going to pass in new user. We're then going to save that change. We're going to say db.session.commit. We're going to save it. Now we're going to re-query that user. So we're going to say user users. And then we're going to basically re-query this. At that point, user is going to be the same. User is going to refer to the same object at that point. So next, we're going to say, We're going to then make the response message. So we're going to say response message equals, we're going to say render. We're going to pass in the user that we just queried, and then the user message that we just created. And then we're going to create our XML, the XML that we're going to send to the end user. Twilio is interesting in the sense that in order to send responses send text message responses, you have to send what's called XML, which is kind of like HTML, but a different structure. In this particular case, we're going to send an XML called response, or sorry, is it response? Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to say response, and then we're going to send message because we're sending a text message to the user. Close that tag, and then close that bigger tag. And we're going to format that by passing in response message. And then we're going to return response. We're going to pass in that XML that we just created. And then we're also going to give it a MIME type text XML. Because it's an XML format, we got to make sure that we let the user know that this is an XML format. So with all that out of the way, we're going to do the last part of this particular component, which is if name equals name, we're going to app.run. Debug equals to true, so that we can know our errors. So we're going to say user reloader equals true. Use reloader, excuse me. Or actually, you can just leave those. You can just leave those blank. So you can just say app.run. All right. So basically, now our chatbot is almost finished. Now we got to create some basic files to like manage it so that when we deploy it to Heroku, it's like very simple. The first one that we're going to create is a proc file. So it's going to be called proc file. So you just create proc file. No extension at the end. It's just proc file. Now, in this one, you're going to say, I'm going to copy and paste the proc file required, the things that are part of that. So, and I'll explain how this works in a bit. So, this is basically the proc file. This basically tells Heroku how to interact with our code. In this particular case, we want to create a web worker, which allows for us to create a website. We then call Gunicorn, the G-Unicorn, the library we installed. And then we want it to get the app file called app.py and then use the app object in the app file that we've created. So that's basically what that is saying. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our runtime, excuse me. We're going to create runtime.txt. In our runtime file, we're going to use we're going to import the version of Python that we're using. In this particular case, we're using version Python. I'm using Python 3.8.1. If, for example, you're on Python 2, you might do Python 2.7.11. That's kind of the format that you will use. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our .env file. So, So this is the file where I've been referencing a couple of times that we're loading in. We're going to call this our .env. It's .env. So the first thing that we're going to create is a thing called database URL. And we're going to use a particular, we're going to use this database. So in this case, it's going to be a PostgreSQL, Postgres. This is, don't copy and paste this yes yet, I'm going to have to explain this a little bit. Localhost 5432, and then role. Now, this database URL is a little complicated, or it's a lot to take in. Basically, we're using a Postgres database. So if you're using a Postgres database, you're going to call the database driver essentially at this part of the URL. If you're using a different database like MariaDB or MySQL or other database URLs, you're going to change that to the appropriate one. But in this case, we're using Postgres, so that's what's being called. Right here is the username and the password that I'm using to log in to my database. In this particular case, by default, my username is Postgres and my password is password. We're then using the server, which is localhost, which is on my local computer. This is the port that you use to connect to the Postgres database. By default, Postgres connects to 5432 port, so that usually stays the same. And then this is the actual database, the database essentially. There's the database thing, and then there's like the database within. I'm trying to think of a better way to explain this because that's very confusing. There's a database, and then there's the database driver. So this is like how you're connecting to it, and then this is the name of the database in your server, right? So that's the name this is the connection to the server, and then this is the database on the server that we're connecting to. So we're going to save that. And the last thing we're going to need to do is make a file called requirements.txt. So requirements.txt. Now, this is where we're going to actually save or keep record of all of the things that we've installed into this project. So we'll just say, Flask. We imported Flask, SQL Alchemy. We did requests. We did Python.env. We did Flask script, Flask migrate. We did psychopg2, and then we did Unicorn. All right, so that is all the code that we need to write. And now we're going to deploy this onto Heroku. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to type, we're going to share, new share to this. All right. Exit. All right, so now we're going to actually deploy the code onto Heroku. First thing we're going to do is we're going to git init in order to initialize the Git repo in our code. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to just check the status to show you that these are the files that are basically being tracked. Oh, sorry, we need to do one thing before this. So the thing that we need to do before this is I'm going to create a database on my local computer. So we're going to say Heroku. We're going to use the name of Postgres, and sorry, not Heroku. Excuse me. We're going to PSQL u Postgres, and then I'm going to type in my password, which is password in this case, and we're going to create a database. We're going to create database. The database, which is roll out test. That created the database, so we're going to leave that. Now we got to create the migration. So we're going to say Python DB, or we're going to do Python migrate.py DB and then we're going to init that migration. Yeah, we're going to init that migration. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually, okay. In Python, so on my computer, it's Pi instead of Python, but if you might have to test that out. So if you have Python, it might be Python or it might be Pi. So in this case, Pi, migrate.py, we're going to initialize that migration. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to migrate that database. So we're going to say pi migrate.py db migrate. And then the last thing we're going to need to do is upgrade our current database. So we're going to say pi migrate.py db upgrade. So that upgrades our database. So now with all that, we're going to get status. We're going to basically add all of that stuff into our repo. So we're going to get add. We're going to do a dot just to add everything into that repo. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get remote add origin. We're going to need to create a connection to, we're going to make a repo. In this particular case, I am connecting to a personal repo. It's also going to be accessible online, but let me get that link. So we're going to get remote add origin, that particular link, which is my actual repo. Then we're going to get commit. We're going to add a message. We're going to say initial commit. And then we're going to push that. So git push origin master in order to push those changes to the database or to the GitHub repo. Next thing that you're going to then do is you're going to, we've done this, now we're going to deploy it onto Heroku. So so now what you see here is essentially my Heroku account. You would create a new project. In this case, I'm going to create a new project, new app. I'm going to call it rollout test. So I'm going to create that app. And then I'm going to go to access. I'm going to go to resources. And then I'm going to search for Heroku Postgres. This is going to add a database onto this project. So I'm going to provision that. Back to overview. Now, remember the name that you gave it. So you're going to do Heroku login. And this is going to log you into your Heroku account. In this particular case, so I'm going to log in. Wait, so all right, so I logged into my Heroku account. Now I'm going to get a Heroku get semicolon remote, do -a in order to reference a particular project. In this particular case, I'm going to say roll out test. Oh, sorry, Heroku get remote a roll out test. That's going to set that. And now we're going to push that to the Heroku master project. So this is going to deploy it, checking all that stuff. This is probably this is going to take a while. All right, so with that, we're gonna do two more things. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to here. Oh wait, was I? I'm sorry. We're gonna go to we're gonna run the console. We're going to, let me see if it's, okay. So we're gonna run the excuse me, I think you might have missed some of that. Let me switch back to the, all right. Okay, so basically I logged in, so I did like Heroku log in order to log in. I then did Heroku git remote a, and then the name of the project, which is rollout test. I then said git push Heroku master in order to deploy it. Everything's up to date because I just pushed it. Now I'm going to go back here. Now in here, we need to do that migration that we did on my personal computer on this machine. So we're going to do it's Python migrate.py db upgrade. We're going to upgrade our database to be accurate to the current database. So we're upgrading it in this case. So we upgrade, it'll run that command. All right, so everything is upgraded on our server. Now, you're going to need to get your, you're now finally going to do your Twilio account. So when you have your Twilio account, you'll be logged in right here. You will then go to this part. You will click this thing called phone numbers. I'm going to pin it to the dock in this case. So you click phone numbers. You're going to buy a phone number. I would recommend toll free so that they don't get blocked. So we're going to search for a phone number. Oh, sorry, buy a new phone number. In this case, we're going to say 855 to get the toll-free numbers. So we're going to buy that number. So I'm going to remember that. So 855-953-3247. All right. So now that we have that number, we're going to go back to the console. We're going to go to phone numbers. We're going to active numbers, and then we're going to click the number that we just purchased. We're going to then scroll down to where it says messaging, and it says a message comes in. We're going to change that to this URL. So HTTPS rollout test, which is the name of the app that we've created, .herokuapp.com/Twilio, which is the route that we're connected to. We're going to save that. And just to see if it's online, we're going to go here, and it should just say hi. So it just says hi. So that means it's live on the internet, and that all of our code is essentially working now. The last thing that we need to do is go to our settings. We're going to reveal we're going to reveal our config stuff, and then we're going to put so it's going to be a geolocation API key. I'm not going to actually show you an API key. I'm just going to put some gibberish just because I don't want to actually put my API keys out. Save that. I'm going to change that to actually be legit, but now we have basically deployed our own chatbot onto Heroku. So let's go to present. So there are many ways you can improve this chatbot. I feel like this was a lot, and it's going to definitely take some time to process this. But there are definitely ways to improve this chatbot if you're interested in looking at ways to improve it. One way is to add different languages. You can build it out in a way that allows for it to not just be in English, but to be in Spanish or other languages. You can troubleshoot the rollout API a little bit better. There might be some bugs or some ways to be some use cases that we're not entirely sure of that you might need to take into consideration if you want to expand this out. Another thing that you can do is send reminder text messages to the user when they're finished with the chatbot. So they can save, you could essentially like save a message or like a save, hey, this is when you get your trash rolled out. I can send you like periodic text messages to remind you, right? Those are some ways you can improve it. There might be some other ways that you come up with or other chatbot ideas that you have. So I want to thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, like leave them in, put them in the chat for sure.